Okay, Chip, are you ready to go in about 1 minute?
I'm ready.
And just confirming, can you see the slide? I switched decks there.
Yes, I can.
Okay, terrific.
All right, and Alex and Dan are on as well, I assume?
Yes, sir.
Great. Wow, no one's called me sir in a long time.
So with that, we'll turn to the next presentation, and I'm very excited to introduce my partner and actually also a moderator and the MC of a previous food summit as well, Chip Magid. Chip is a partner in our Washington, D.C. office, where he heads the office and works extensively in the food and agribusiness industry on litigation and advice-related matters and the like. So, Chip, take it away.
Thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. I am very excited to present our speakers today on the future of food. First, let me introduce you to Alexandria Coari, who goes by Alex. Alex serves as the Capital and Innovation Director for ReFed, which is a national nonprofit with a holistic view of the food system that works to advance solutions to reduce the amount of food wasted in the U.S. She works to catalyze more than $18 billion of public, private, and philanthropic capital needed to scale solutions to food waste. She is a former investment banker, worked on sustainable food supply chain matters, and has extensive innovation acceleration experience with startups, for-profits and nonprofits, both in the US and Latin America. We'll be hearing from Alex in just a moment. I'd also like to introduce you to Dan Altschuler Malek. Dan is the managing partner at Unovis Asset Management, New Crop Capital in the Bay Area of California, so we had to get up early for this. Unovis and New Crop it's a global asset management firm that provides early stage funding to entrepreneurs developing plant-based and cultivated meat. Those are alternatives to foods derived from conventional animal agriculture, such as beef, chicken, pork, dairy, eggs, fish, and shellfish. As managing partner, Dan heads the firm's activities in North America and Israel, exploring deal flow, creating strategic opportunities, and working with founders to solve daily challenges and to evaluate strategic decisions. He comes to the food arena with a lot of interesting background. In addition to his financial background, he launched a snack company, he headed a logistics firm, he opened a restaurant, and managed a creative agency. So it really brings a diverse background. So welcome to both Alex and Dan. The future of food, it covers a lot of ground, and there are a lot of things that we could cover, including the disruption in means of direct sales to consumers, vertical farming, which is stacking trays in buildings to reduce land use and to increase yields, repurposing supply chains, which has become important at a time of COVID. A lot of this is discussed in the written materials that my colleagues Eric Andrews and Nora Cook put together, and I commend those to you. But let's turn to our panelists and first just kind of lay the groundwork. As you can see from the slide, the population of this planet continues to grow and grow quickly, and as they say, they aren't making any more land, which means the land available for agriculture is finite, the population continues to increase. Mike, if you go ahead and advance the slide. At the same time, food insecurity is at present and continues to be a huge problem. As you can see from this slide, more than a quarter of the people on the planet suffer from food insecurity. That means they're either hungry quite a bit of the time, or they lack regular access to nutritious and sufficient food. In addition to food insecurity, our conventional means of producing food have environmental impacts. Mike, if you could advance the slide. You can see very briefly here, and this is not to be down on any particular source of protein, but some of the more popular protein sources such as beef, pork, and chicken, as you can see, have effects on greenhouse gas use of water. This slide doesn't talk about land use, but land for grazing or growing crops for livestock feed obviously takes quite a bit of land, and by comparison, some of the sources that are used in plant-based substitutes for animal protein have greatly reduced environmental impacts. In addition to that, conventional meat raises some health issues, and Mike, if we could advance the next slide, animal welfare issues continue to be a concern in terms of how conventional animal protein is raised. All of this is driving a market for alternatives to conventional animal protein, both to feed a growing planet and to alleviate some of the concerns we just talked about. This slide is, I'm sure, almost impossible for everyone to read, but if you look at it in the materials, you can see that there's been quite a bit of growth in the plant-based category, and Dan's going to go into that a little bit more. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dan, and Dan, maybe you can start out a little bit and go beyond the very brief and inadequate intro I gave you to talk a little bit about Unovis and New Crop and how you got into this space.
Thank you very much, Chip. It's a pleasure to be here. Hi, everybody. Basically, as Chip was saying, the global food supply chain is broken. There are many of us now on the planet. There will be many more. And the way that we are eating is not sustainable. It's not healthy. It's creating a lot of damage to our environment. And additionally, there's a lot of concerns for the animals. And it's not to assign blame, but the reality is that in the previous century, there was a very strong and successful focus on increasing the amount of food that was created to feed the global population. But how it was done left a lot to be desired. Based on that, our firm focuses on taking out industrialized animal agriculture from the food supply and presenting consumers with alternatives. Could we skip to the next slide, please? In the past 5 years, we've made 36 public investments, as you can see here, in companies that are providing consumers with alternatives to hamburgers, to tuna fish, to different cheeses. And these alternatives are being made from plants. A lot are coming from soy. Pea protein right now is in the mix. But then we have some other companies that have decided that maybe if people want to eat an animal steak, what if we could create that without the animal in between, the environmental damage, the resources that are tied to that? Those companies, such as Memphis Meats or Aleph Farms, are taking technology that was previously developed for pharmaceutical and medical purposes, bioprinting of ears, if you will, and other human parts, and saying, instead of creating a couple of human cells at a very high price point, because there's money in pharma, could we revert the equation? And could we actually create hamburgers at the price point that consumers would be able to pay for? And it's an interesting world. And I'm happy to say that the awareness around the world by consumers of all ages, even though it is led in some parts by millennials, is there. So we are seeing strong emphasis across Europe, North America, South America, and Asia for different reasons. And all of this awareness has only been exacerbated because of the current global crisis.
So Dan, on the slide up here, and maybe you could speak a little bit into what you're seeing in terms of the market growth in some of these areas, and where you see the market going. There's obviously been a lot of buzz with the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger in terms of plant-based meat, and a lot of talk about so-called cultivated meat or cell-based meat. Where do you see this all going?
Okay, so for background, we take plant-based milks as the primer. Plant-based milk, almond milk, has been around for decades and decades. But the reality is that consumers either were unaware or did not think much of it. And then 15 plus years ago, a company asked the retailer, what if we put the plant-based milks next to the dairy milks? And boom, in 15 years, we saw that dairy milks have ceded more than 15% of their total market share to alternative milk sources. And that has paved the way for other products. Beyond Meat, Impossible Foods, Alpha Foods, to name a few, have been providing consumers with products that A, taste great, B, are within the price points where because it's one of the key limitations, and C, consumers can eat them in the same way. And so we're starting to see different retailers have either different strategies. Before, there was what was called the vegan penalty box that was way back in the corner, hidden away. And it was just a couple of diehard consumers who really wanted these products. And it was filled with tempeh, it was filled with tofu and the likes. What we are now seeing is a new generation of products that are incorporating different manufacturing technologies, that are using different raw materials, and they're presenting products where consumers are not needing to sacrifice in terms of taste. They're not needing to sacrifice in terms of texture, and they are getting the exact same product that they would enjoy, many times without even knowing that these are being made without animal products inside. And what's very interesting is that there has been a huge hype, and even though $939 million is not a small number for plant-based milks, it is less than 1% of the meat that is sold in the US. So there is still a long ways to go in the meat category, but there's also a lot of opportunity in all other categories. If we think about seafood, if we think about eggs, if we think about all the different dairy products and cheeses that are out there.
So Dan, if I could interrupt a moment, and maybe we need to talk about some of the distinctions. So, back a long time ago, when I was in college or something, people talked about a vegetarian burger, and it was, a bunch of black beans and a couple other things smashed into an inedible puck. And now you have Beyond Burger, Impossible Burger that look and taste an awful lot like hamburger, that are plant-based. And then you're talking about eggs that are plant-based. And then you have cultivated meat, which maybe you could describe the process on that a little bit more. And then hybrids. I understand another company, the Better Meat Company, yesterday, I think, announced that it closed a seed round for kind of a hybrid animal and plant-based protein. Maybe you could go through and discuss each of those and how they're segmented and the technology behind them.
Sure. Let's start with Beyond Meat. So basically, Beyond Meat starts with the premise that if consumers did not need to sacrifice on taste and texture, then they would enjoy either a chicken strip or a burger in the same way, regardless of if it's made from animals or plants. And what they went ahead and they did is they found ways to use extrusion, which is a technology that has been applied for many different industries, from pasta to plastics, where you're putting a lot of products through a high pressure, high moisture situation so that they combined. And they were able to create a burger that looks like a hamburger, that cooks like a hamburger, and that tastes like a hamburger in terms of taste and texture, only it is made with pea protein and a couple of other ingredients. So this is an example of what we call a plant-based meat analog. Different than a cultivated meat. Cultivated has been in the news since Dr. Mark Post from Mosa Meat presented a Petri dish with a burger. What he did was take the technology to replicate cells in a controlled environment and have them multiply. So at the structural level, the difference between a hamburger that comes from a cow that has been grown, fed, used a lot of resources, taken a lot of time, then slaughtered, and a burger that is coming out of a cultivated environment is exactly the same. It's actually those same cells that are taken, they're placed in a controlled environment. They are fed a different type of serum. and they just continue to replicate, and the results are the same. When we're talking about plant-based eggs, the egg is a marvel of nature's technology. And eggs are almost ubiquitous in all cuisines, in all manners of ingredients, be it for a binder or for emulsification properties or for many other things. And there are many products that we would not consider that they have an egg, but they are needed for that to create the chemistry that we want in a different product. Unfortunately, eggs, like any other animal protein, create higher risk of food safety risks, cross-contamination, bacteria, etc. So what we are now exploring and have invested in already is in companies that are developing substitutes to eggs using different types of plant-based proteins, which can replicate those properties without the negative consequences. So it's a great new world in many ways.
Fantastic. So maybe if we could jump to the next slide, Mike. So Dan, maybe you could talk about the investment in this sector. Yes.
So the investment in this sector starts maybe 15 plus years ago, when a new set of entrepreneurs are inspired by companies such as Tofurky, and they say, I want to do something different. And so they start knocking on doors, and obviously this at the time was a very high risk, and people saw low potential proposition. So it was primarily angel investors who were seeding these companies. In the past 8+ years, we have seen this accelerate for several reasons. One, food in general has become a much more exciting industry to invest in all the different areas, from waste management to food technology to agri-tech. So that made it sexy. Then food as a part of our culture has become much more exciting. Everything from the Food Network to celebrity chefs, it just became more ingrained in everyday culture. And in addition to that, we started seeing a lot of interest in people understanding where the food came from and what effects they were having. So because of all of this, where there's interest, there are investors. And we have seen it go scale up. And as these companies are growing, before most investments were being done in the early stages, so call it pre-seed and seed. Now we're having a lot of companies that are in series A, B, C, D, and all the way up into the public markets with the IPO of Beyond Meat. So in general, there is a lot of capital flowing into this. It is global. Definitely the US is leading the way, but there's a lot of investments in Europe. There's a lot of interest in Israel, that's been a food tech nation since it was established. There is a lot of interest in Singapore and also other countries in Asia that are seeing this not just because of the financial benefits, but because this is of strategic importance to all countries to understand how they can feed themselves as the population continues to grow and resources become more constrained.
Great. So let's talk about some of these interesting new products. You talk about Zero Egg. What's that, and what's the market? And Mike, if you could advance the slide, there you go.
Zero Egg. So this is an Israeli company that has found a way to create an egg where you can make a scramble, like you see here, or an omelet, but where you can also apply it to make pastas and to make baked goods and to use as a binder. It is a company that is just launching in the United States in the coming months. And to the point, there is really no one like it out there yet. We have Clara Foods that is proposing to use egg proteins for different alternatives, which is also a great proposition. And then we also have the company formerly known as Hampton Creek, now rebranded as Just, that has created an egg scramble. Unfortunately, those products are not having the properties of an egg. So we're really excited about this, because it's not just, when you're talking about food, you want a company that can go into retail so consumers can enjoy it at home. You want a company that can also provide to food service. So when you go out to any restaurant, be it a Chipotle or an upscale restaurant, you can enjoy it there. And you also want products that can go into B2B settings, so you can sell it to the crafts of the world. Because those are the three avenues for food companies.
Okay, and then black sheep foods. Tell us what we see here.
Black sheep foods. So that is a lamb burger. So lamb is not that popular in the United States. However, in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in parts of Latin America, lamb, sometimes goats, are very, very demanded by the population, by their culinary palates. So what's important to understand is that there are opportunities across the board. Some of them will apply more for the United States, some will apply more for other countries, but it is a very vast opportunity out there.
All right, and then now we have a picture of what I understand is a 3D printed steak. Is that right?
That is correct. So this is a steak that was 3D printed by a PhD in Barcelona named Giuseppe Schionti, who founded Nova Meat. So he is taking the 3D printers that we've heard a big buzz about, and he has found a way to create a micro extrusion where he is creating the texture of the different elements of a steak. So it's the meat, it is the fat, and it's giving it different textures. So when you bite into it, it actually replicates a steak. And his technology, it's very impressive, and it's very exciting because right now we have a lot of burgers, we have a lot of chicken strips, but the ultimate goal is to be able to replicate a steak, a T-bone, a chop, whatever you want, using plant-based technologies so consumers can really get a one-to-one replacement.
And if you go on the Nova Meat website, there's a video that shows the steak being printed, right?
Correct.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's neat to watch. All right, so just to kind of wrap this up and to turn to cultivated meat for a moment, ever since Dr. Post first demonstrated it was possible, I think the estimate was that was a $1.2 million burger. Where are we now? What are the challenges ahead? And when are we going to see a cultivated burger at McDonald's or in the supermarket for general consumption?
So we could say that at the high level, companies that are proposing these types of products have 4 challenges. The scientific, can we do this? The engineering, can we manufacture at scale and with the safety concerns, because we're talking about food? Then there will be the legislative, will the government let us sell this? And lastly, will consumers accept this? On the legislative front, the folks at the Good Food Institute have been helping the different cultivated meat companies present their options to the FDA and really start a conversation, being very proactive, because the FDA, rightly so, wants to make sure that this is safe and that the right guidelines are followed. Since FDA was not, and the USDA was not considering this when the rules were established. Because even though at the anatomic level it's the same thing, everything else is completely different. In terms of when is the time, I don't have a crystal ball in front of me, but we're very excited that some of our portfolio companies like Memphis Meats have been making significant progress and actually raised a very large round about 6 months ago. I would say it's not happening next year. And when it does, it's going to be a trickle down, because at the beginning, the amount of supply is going to be limited. But once we are able to ramp up manufacturing, I do foresee a future where animal protein products that come from animals are the minority of what is consumed around the world. And the remainder is a mix of cultivated and plant-based, as well as, to your point, the hybrids, which is basically taking a base that's probably made of plant-based raw materials or mycelium, which is a fungus, and then it is flavored with cultivated fats. So we have the best of both worlds from a financial point of view.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff, Dan, and we're going to shift gears in just a moment, but stick around. We may have some questions at the end of the program. So Alex, Coari, you've been patiently waiting to tell us about the other side of the equation, food that already exists, that we're growing, that is being raised on the hoof, but we're wasting to a large extent. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about refed and then frame the issue for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me here today. Fantastic conversation so far. So yeah, I mean, as was discussed, you know, at refed, we really charge ourselves as a national nonprofit to have this holistic view of the food system, because what the reality is that we are producing food, whether it's conventionally or unconventionally, so to the points that Dan was making, but at the same time, it's doing us no good to produce more food when our plumbing that exists within the system has leaks or holes in it. So our work is really focused around advancing data-driven solutions to reduce the amount of food that's wasted here in the US. And the ways that we do that are really around trying to leverage data and insights, and then innovation and capital to really unlock challenges and barriers that exist. And they are very unique to the specific challenges and solutions that are needed in this space. But, you know, this problem is a big problem. So if you advance to the next slide, I'll kind of contextualize how big we're talking here. So in the US, which is really our focus at refed, food waste has been a problem for many, many years. It was a problem before COVID. Obviously, it is still a problem, but that also presents an opportunity, and we'll get to that in a second. But, you know, about $218 billion worth of food is spent growing and processing and transporting and ultimately throwing away that food every year. And all that while, that's about 40% of all food grown here in the US. And all the while, we've got 40 million Americans. Now that's grown by maybe 17 million more, according to Feeding America, because of COVID. They're facing food insecurity. At the same time, that's wasting huge amounts of our water and fertilizer and cropland. And frankly, it's the single largest material type that is in our landfills. And because of that, you know, food waste is contributing 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So there's, you know, this story that people will tell that, you know, if food waste was its own country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, which is incredible to think about. And all the while about $74 billion cost to American businesses. So this is a huge problem. If we go to the next slide, you know, that $218 billion in the US represents about 63 million tons. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is kind of that division across the supply chain of where the majority of that food waste is happening. So we've got farms on the left, manufacturers in the middle, consumer facing businesses, and then homes. So you're seeing, you know, obviously at homes, all of us as consumers, we're wasting a ton of food. We have a huge responsibility and role to play in terms of fighting food waste. But as you all will know, consumer facing businesses, whether you are a supermarket or retailer, you know, a restaurant, food service organization, you have a lot of pull up and down the supply chain, a lot of influence up and down the supply chain. So really that's where refed and several other organizations and nonprofits in the space really focus their energy, because we think that by helping food businesses solve this problem within their own institutions, we're able to drive benefits for them, but also more social and environmental impacts, which we can talk about.
Yeah, great. So Alex, maybe you could talk a little bit about how refed works with companies, with consumers, with, you know, across the supply chain to achieve reductions in food waste and advance the causes that you're talking about.
Yeah, so reducing food waste as we see it, we're not just trying to solve food waste, you know, in and of itself. We're really trying to reduce food waste as a means to multiple positive ends. So like I said, that can be working with food businesses to help drive, you know, save costs, help drive their profits, help them achieve their sustainability, CSR goals, help them meet, and, you know, activist investor demands that might be pressuring on their business. But it also helps drive some other great positive social and environmental impacts, whether that is, you know, reduction of those greenhouse gas emissions, it's saving us water, making sure that the land and energy, human capital that we're putting into the food production, whether it's through traditional or maybe traditional production methods is being valued, because right now when we're throwing away that food, we're not really valuing all the time and energy and inputs that went into the process of that. And, you know, one of the biggest topics of the day that I often find myself talking about with funders and investors across the sector is just there's a lot of energy around solutions that will solve climate change. And for those of you who are familiar or maybe aren't familiar, there's another great research nonprofit out there named Project Drawdown, who did a very comprehensive update of a report around the best solutions to fighting climate change. And what they came back with is that fighting food waste and addressing food waste is really the #1 way that we can address climate change. So that gives us a lot of hope that, you know, we're on the right path by focusing on food waste, but really it's not just for that in and of itself. It's because we're trying to drive more economic, environmental, and social positive externalities.
That is great. So maybe you could give us some examples of how you address food waste in the system and the solutions that you've implemented.
Yeah. So our organization, you know, itself, we don't actually work on the ground to fight food waste. We're not the ones that are, you know, helping businesses like firsthand institute solutions, or to help businesses make food donations, or, you know, running anaerobic digestion or recycling facilities. But we work at a more systems level where we're really quantifying the economic analyses, the data and insights, and then creating programs around that, which I can also talk about. But to start here, you know, really you can't manage what you don't measure, as the saying goes. And so a lot of our work really focuses on quantifying not just how much food waste is happening, but more focusing on the viable solutions. So back in 2016, when our organization got started, we developed this really, really well-respected report. This was before my time, so I can't take any credit for it. But back in 2016, we wrote this roadmap to reduce US food waste by 20%. And in that report, we identified 27 solutions that really span the food waste hierarchy. So we're talking about, you know, source reduction, which is known as like prevention of food waste. Then the next step is really recovering whatever food, okay, unfortunately didn't hit its original intention on the sales channel, but maybe let's recover that because it's edible and provide that to people in need. So that's food recovery. And then if that food isn't edible, we're talking about recycling it. So maybe that does go for waste to energy, or it goes into compost. Maybe it's turned into biomaterials. But all in all, we're trying to avoid food going into landfill, because then we're really impacting greenhouse gas emissions even further, and we're really wasting all of those resources and natural resources and human capital that went into the production of that. And if you go to the next slide, you know, I just want to highlight a couple of the solutions that were originally identified in our analysis. So like I said, you don't manage what you don't measure. So tracking and analytics technology from organizations like LeanPath or Wasteless are great technologies that are being used mostly in the food service and hospitality sector right now, but helping them really use both hardware and software components, AI and other technology, to take pictures, recognize the food that is going into the trash, so that businesses can then make better buying decisions, can train their staff better about how to use those products so they don't ultimately go into the garbage, and help them better just, you know, run their operations, which just has multiple benefits, as we talked about at the top. Spoilage prevention, that's another really hot area in the food waste investment landscape right now. So we're talking about technologies from guys like Appeal Sciences, which is a plant-based application for whole foods right now. So whether it's avocados or asparagus, they've started to attract real investment dollars. They actually had a big investment earlier this year that really puts them as the first billion-dollar unicorn food waste company in the space. But they have had great traction in different retailers like Kroger, and Harps and others, but, you know, working with farms and manufacturers to really apply this spray onto the products. It's 100% organic, actually derived from other food waste onto this product, and really extends that shelf life, reducing oxidation and everything else. Hazel Technology is another form of spoilage prevention, but that's more of like an insert, a little package or sachet insert that goes into boxes of produce to help that last longer. and Mori, which is previously known as Cambridge Crops, actually very similar to what Appeal is doing, but it's a different type of technology that's using silk from silkworms, and again, applying that to different products. But you know, where I think that industry can really be going is, just as Dan pointed out, you know, there's so many different commodity types in this space. So thinking about the application and further research into how can this be applied, not just to fresh produce, but there's a whole, you know, category around seafood and meats and others that actually have much more higher spoilage percentages and obviously have bigger impacts on the environment when we start getting into the meat category and otherwise. So yeah, I just wanted to give a couple examples there.
Fantastic. So this is going to take some money, and you mentioned that you're providing data-driven solutions. Where is the money coming from, and who's involved in the space?
Yeah. So as you pointed out in the introduction, Chip, I mean, my overarching goal as the Director of Capital and Innovation at ReFed is really to think about how much money needs to come into this space. What are the right capital types that need to be supporting the various solutions that are needed to solve this problem of food waste? And then how do we really motivate them and remove those barriers so that that money flows more easily? In order to help food businesses adopt these solutions, it's going to require tens of billions of dollars. And so what our analysis is showing, as you might surmise, is that it's going to take a combo of public, private, and philanthropic capital that's going to get us there. And there's this overarching global and national goal here to reduce food waste and loss by 50% by 2030. So that's really kind of our main charge. But in order to get us to where more traditional sources of financing like private equity and project finance is going to come in, we really feel like catalytic capital, which as we define it is more on the philanthropic, government and non-government grants side, impact investments, starting to think about interesting, you know, low to no interest rate loans, PRIs and other innovative types of financing can really start de-risking the sector. And at the same time, corporate finance is going to be incredibly important because in order for these food businesses to obviously adopt some of these technologies, it is going to take some of the, the cash on balance sheet, some internal human capital required to put these solutions to work. So there's investors that are needed in this space to play their specific role, depending on the types of capital that are most, readily available for them. And then corporates as well, there's this huge role. And so we spend a lot of time engaging both of those stakeholders. And on the next slide, in that original roadmap that we developed back in 2016, we identified that for an $18 billion investment across public, private, and philanthropic capital sources, that could lead to about $100 billion in societal economic value. And we're not just talking, out of the goodness of our hearts, this is going to feed more people and provide more meals, which in and of itself is absolutely a worthwhile charge. But we're talking about real dollars and cents here. We're talking about saving businesses $19 billion or adding $19 billion in profit. We're talking about $60 billion in consumer savings. We're creating jobs with investments into the food waste sector. So there's a real reason to be looking at this space, and investors increasingly more and more are starting to put their money to work in this space.
Well, that is a fantastic ROI. So let's talk about COVID just a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time since that's all anyone talks about, but has COVID had an impact in the food waste space?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely won't belabor the point. I think we're all living it day in and day out. I think our main point here is that, COVID has just exposed existing weaknesses. Nothing new there. There's obviously this immediate need. We all see the news articles and see the long lines of people at food banks. Otherwise, as unemployment spikes up. And so we need to do and find immediate solutions towards fighting food waste and relieving hunger of those that are food insecure right now. But pretty soon here, this is a ripe opportunity for us to start thinking about how we build a more resilient food system. So that's really where our energy is being spent right now, is helping those corporates and investors think about how to be building towards a more resilient system where we don't have so much food waste and we don't have so much hunger. And a couple of the ways that we're doing that, and then I just wanted to share today. So going back to, what we talked about at the top, the importance of data and insights. So ReFed itself does a lot around knowledge sharing. We create a lot of reports We are tracking investment in the space. We put out investment in innovation newsletters so that people can understand what are the hot topics of the day, what are interesting investments that have happened, opportunities for involvement. On the next slide, we also recognize that connecting the network is really valuable and important in solving this problem. You know, we believe that government has to get involved in this. Businesses on the food side have to get involved. Investors, as I mentioned, and solution providers all need to be at the table. So we do a lot of work at ReFed in terms of bringing networks together, harder in a time where we're all working virtually, but we've done that in a few different ways through accelerator programs, investor events, innovation workshops. And then finally, you know, it takes money to make money, it takes money to get stuff done. And so we also focus on helping capital providers in the space deploy their capital. So we have advised organizations like the Kroger Co. and their Zero Hunger Zero Waste Foundation, DoorDash, the wonderful company. We even started our own COVID fund this year to support organizations in the space. We raised about 3.6 million. We've invested, or funded rather, that's a grant structure, into 37 organizations across the country. So a few different ways to get involved, yeah.
And you know, on this program, listening in are senior people from many of the nation's leading food companies. And if there's an interest in partnering with ReFed to both advance societal goals, but also realize some of the profit potential and the other ROI, I assume that it would be all right if they contacted you to learn how they can utilize your data and take your insights to figure out how to join in finding solutions to these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to chat.
That'd be great. Well, we're, I think, out of time here, regrettably, but as you can see here, we've got, and this is also in the materials that were sent out, Alex's email address, Dan's email address. As you can tell from their presentations today, you know, two of the leading thinkers in this area and thinking about how we can build a sustainable and better future. And I'd like to thank both Dan and Alex for taking their time today to share thoughts with us. Mike, I don't know if we have time for any questions, but please follow up with Dan and Alex. And again, both of you, thank you very much for taking your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
All right, terrific. Well, thank you to Chip, Alex, and Dan for a fantastic and fascinating presentation. I, for one, I'm going to try and find that video on NovaMeet. It's fascinating, and what an amazing world we're living in. So thank you for your presentation.